parents kicked me out on my birthday, so I froze their credit cards and watched their life fall apart. I am Claire Bennett and I am 23 years old. I turned 24 on a Tuesday. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just dinner at home with my parents, maybe a cake if mom remembered to defrost it in time. I wasn't expecting balloons or a surprise party, but I wasn't expecting to be shoved out the front door either, holding a trash bag full of my clothes and hearing the deadbolt click behind me. That morning, I'd woken up with a hopeful feeling in my chest. I'd worked hard the last few months, taking on extra shifts at the retail job I hated to help with rent and groceries. My parents had been under financial stress since Dad lost his job and Mom's hours got cut, and I'd stepped up because I thought that's what family did. What I didn't realize was that the more I helped, the less they respected me. The first signs were small. My dad started using my debit card by accident and forgetting to replace the money. My mom began making passive-aggressive comments about me still not having a real job. I let it slide because they were my parents, and I figured the stress was making them behave differently. I told myself it would pass. I even let my younger brother, who hadn't paid a bill in his life, move into my room after he got kicked out of college for not showing up to classes. I started sleeping on the couch because he needed the space to get his life together. It wasn't ideal, but I didn't complain. I thought being the quiet, helpful daughter would eventually lead to recognition, or at least appreciation. But things got worse. The electricity bill suddenly doubled, and I discovered they'd upgraded the internet speed and added premium channels, without asking and using my card to pay for it. When I questioned it, Mom rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic. I noticed my toiletries disappearing. My skincare products, the ones I saved for, started showing up in the upstairs bathroom my brother now used. My clothes went missing too, and when I saw one of my old hoodies on a stranger walking out of the house, one of my brother's friends, I realized the boundaries had completely evaporated. And still, I stayed. Then my birthday came. I'd requested just one thing, a quiet dinner, just us, no drama. I got off work early, bought a modest cake with my own money, and picked up takeout from my favorite Thai place. When I walked into the house, no one greeted me. My mom was on the phone, laughing. My dad was watching TV, feet up on the coffee table I had bought. My brother wasn't home. I set the food down and tried to shake off the growing lump in my throat. Maybe they were planning something and trying to act normal to throw me off. An hour passed. Then 2. I finally asked if we were going to eat together, and my dad muted the TV without even looking at me. My mom hung up the phone slowly and turned to face me. What she said next didn't register right away. She told me that I needed to move out. That things were too cramped with all 4 of us in the house and I was old enough to be on my own. That they needed my room for something more useful, like a home gym or maybe a storage space. I asked where I was supposed to go, and my mom shrugged. I said I paid half the rent, and she said the lease wasn't in my name, so technically I was just a guest. My dad walked into the kitchen, came back with a black garbage bag, and told me to pack the essentials. No one raised their voice. It was all very calm, like they were talking about throwing out expired milk. By 9 p.m., I was outside. The porch light flickered once and then shut off. I stood there with my bag, my heart pounding and my hands shaking. I had $26 in my account, no car, and no backup plan. I sat on the curb for an hour, calling friends, but most were either too far, too busy, or just didn't answer. Eventually, I walked 4 miles to the 24-hour diner near the highway and sat there nursing a cup of tea I couldn't afford, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. I just sat at that booth, staring at the Formica table and thinking about everything I'd done for them. Every bill I covered, every errand I ran, every time I took the blame for something I didn't do. I thought about my birthday cake, still sitting uneaten on the kitchen counter. I thought about my brother wearing my clothes, about my mom laughing on the phone, and about how none of them even said happy birthday. And as the sky began to lighten outside the diner window, something inside me shifted. The fear was still there, but it was getting crowded out by something else. Something sharper. Colder. Focused. I didn't have much. But what I did have was knowledge. I had been the one managing their online banking ever since Dad got laid off and forgot his login password. I had access to their accounts, not to steal from them, but to keep their utilities on. I'd been the one making sure their credit card bills were paid on time. I knew exactly where their money came from and, more importantly, where it went. And now, standing in the bathroom of that diner at 6:13 a.m., I looked at my reflection and made a decision. If they wanted to treat me like an outsider, then they'd get to live like I was one. I walked to the public library when it opened at 8. My hands trembled as I logged into the computer, but my mind was sharp. I accessed my parents' main credit accounts, the ones they used for everything from groceries to gas to online shopping. I wasn't going to take a single cent. But I didn't need to. I froze every card. I changed the account passwords. I turned on two-factor authentication linked to an email they didn't have. Then I logged out and cleared the history. By the time I stepped outside, the air felt different. Like the sun was finally touching parts of me I didn't know had been in the dark. I didn't know where I was going next. But I knew exactly what was going to happen when they tried to pay for gas or swipe their card at the grocery store. They would call me, of course. They would rage and accuse and demand. But they wouldn't reach me. Not yet. They had made a choice when they locked that door behind me on my birthday. Now it was my turn to make a choice of my own. What I didn't know then was how quickly things would spiral. How one frozen card would lead to another account being flagged. How my brother's new phone plan, linked to my dad's name, would get suspended the moment the autopay failed. Or how my mom's obsession with online shopping would backfire so spectacularly. They weren't just financially dependent on me. They were used to living like nothing they did had consequences. That belief was about to be tested in ways none of us could have predicted. And while they scrambled to regain control of their lives, I started building mine from scratch. I wasn't sure what revenge was supposed to feel like. But in that moment, it felt a lot like justice. A justice I hadn't known I was capable of. Not just cold or cruel, but earned. And it was only the beginning. I didn't hear from them for 2 days. Maybe they thought it was a glitch. Maybe they assumed the bank was just being weird again, like that time someone bought concert tickets in Atlanta on Dad's card and they blamed a hacker. But by the 3rd day, my phone started lighting up. First came the texts, short, sharp bursts of confusion turning into anger. Then the voicemails came. Mom's voice trembled at first, unsure. Then it sharpened. She was demanding explanations, threatening to call the authorities as if she even knew what crime to report. My brother left me the worst ones. He swore at me like I was a stranger who had wrecked his life for fun. "This is psychotic," he spat. "You're not just kicked out, you're dead to us." I didn't answer any of them. I was living out of a cheap hostel in a rough part of town, using the little cash I had to buy time. A part of me felt sick with guilt, an ache in the pit of my stomach that flared every time I thought of my dad confused at a gas station or my mom yelling at a grocery clerk when the card declined. But another part of me, the part that had been stepped on and silenced for years, felt something else. Power. Not the evil kind. Not the kind that ruins lives just to prove a point. But the kind that comes from finally standing up when the weight on your back has become too much. The kind that says, no more. On the 5th day, something shifted. I got a message from my dad, not a voice note, not a long text. Just one sentence: "Your mother fainted at the pharmacy." That one got to me. My hand shook, and I stared at it for a long time. She had a heart condition, the kind that needed medication daily. I hadn't cut off the debit accounts, just the credit cards, but what if they didn't have enough in checking? What if the pharmacist had refused the refill? I called the pharmacy myself, anonymously, and paid for her next month's meds using my own emergency savings. I told them to hold it under her name and number so she could pick it up the next day. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was just done letting them hurt me. That night, I went to Jessica's place, an old friend from school who had seen my name trending on a private Facebook group where my aunt was publicly dragging me. "My niece thinks she's better than her own family," the post read. "Imagine freezing your own mother's money and leaving her to collapse at a Walgreens." Pure evil. Hundreds of comments. Dozens of judgmental relatives piling on. Jessica let me in with a hug and a glass of water, even though she hadn't seen me in months. "You look like hell," she said softly. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. When I finished, she nodded and said, "I've got a spare couch, and you've got a story that's just starting." She was right. Because while my family was unraveling without me, I started threading myself back together. I found part-time temp work at a nearby admin office. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough for a week's groceries and a bus pass. I reached out to an old professor who had once offered to help if I ever needed a letter of recommendation. She remembered me. Within a week, I had an interview for a junior copywriting internship, unpaid, of course, but it was something to get me back into the career path I'd abandoned to keep my family afloat. I didn't get the position, but the hiring manager forwarded my resume to another agency. That's when the real twist began. Because that agency? It turned out to be the one that had done my father's last freelance design project before he was fired. I didn't bring it up in the interview. But the woman interviewing me, Clara, recognized the last name. "Are you related to Mitchell?" she asked casually. I froze for a second. Then nodded. "Daughter. Formerly." She blinked. "That explains it," she murmured, then changed the subject. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. I knew. My father's work had been sloppy, incomplete. He had burned bridges, blamed everyone else, and walked away thinking he was too good to fix anything. That kind of behavior had left a trail, and now I was standing in it. But I didn't walk out of that office defeated. I stayed. I answered every question. I smiled when I wanted to cry. I proved I was more than my last name. And somehow, they gave me a chance. Meanwhile, back at the house I used to call home, the chaos was hitting a new level. My cousin Lena reached out quietly, sliding into my DMs to say, "I don't agree with how you were treated. Auntie's losing it. Your mom's been borrowing money from everyone. Your dad's been trying to cash checks from an old client, but they bounced. Your brother tried to sell your old bike, but it got stolen outside the pawn shop. It's a mess." I thanked her, but I didn't say much. Because here's the thing, I wasn't gloating. I wasn't hoping they'd crash and burn. I just needed them to face what they'd avoided for years. Consequences. Then, another twist. The credit card company reached out to me. Since I had access to the accounts and was listed as an authorized user on some, because I used to pay them, they were asking me to verify recent suspicious activity. Someone had tried to unfreeze the cards using fake documents. They flagged it. The company suspected fraud. I knew exactly who it was. My brother had a friend who dabbled in shady online services. And I knew, without doubt, they were trying to override me the same way they'd overridden every boundary I'd ever set in my life. So I made another decision. I removed myself from every account I'd ever been attached to. I called the utility companies and had them transfer everything back to my parents. I closed the shared Amazon account. I even called the landlord and told him I would no longer be responsible for any portion of the rent, as I was no longer living there, and hadn't been since I was kicked out. He sounded surprised. "They told me you were traveling," he said. "Still paying your share." I laughed. "I'm broke and sleeping on a couch." "You've been lied to." He paused, then sighed. "They're 2 months behind." When I hung up, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a new number. I didn't recognize it, but something told me to answer. It was my mom. Her voice was lower, cracked. She said things weren't good. That they needed help. That they were willing to forgive me if I came home and acted like this whole thing never happened. I stayed silent for a few seconds before answering. I told her I wasn't interested in pretending anymore. That forgiveness wasn't the same thing as pretending nothing had happened. That she hadn't just kicked me out, she'd abandoned me. And now, I was finally choosing me. She hung up without saying goodbye. And for the first time in my life, I felt fine with that. But I knew this was far from over. Because the fallout wasn't just emotional, it was financial. The credit freeze meant their scores dropped. The bounced checks triggered penalties. Their rent being behind would soon turn into eviction notices. They weren't just facing embarrassment. They were facing real-life collapse. And I was finally rising. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was a reset. One they never saw coming. But the real twist? That came when I found out what my brother had done next. And it changed everything. I didn't expect my brother to be the one who escalated things. He had always been the golden child, even when he failed at everything. When he dropped out of college, my parents called it a mental health break. When he blew through 3 jobs in 1 year, they said he just hadn't found the right fit. When he crashed Dad's car and blamed the rain, they agreed. He had never faced a single consequence in his life. So when I heard from Lena again, this time with screenshots, I wasn't surprised. But I was still stunned. My brother had been using my name. Not just throwing shade on social media or lying to relatives. He had taken it a step further. He had opened a line of credit under my name. He'd used my information, the stuff he easily had access to back when we lived together, to file for a store card. And not just 1. 3. Electronics. Furniture. Clothing. Thousands of dollars in charges, all racked up in less than 6 weeks. I didn't find out from him. I found out from a fraud alert in my email. Then a call from a collections agency asking me to confirm a recent $1,200 purchase of a gaming console and accessories. My stomach dropped. I sat in Jessica's kitchen, blinking at the screen like it would change if I stared hard enough. But it didn't. The account was under my name. My social. My address, their house. He'd even used my old email, rerouted through a different recovery number. I didn't even know that was possible. The rage that hit me wasn't like before. This wasn't about being disrespected or used. This was criminal. He had crossed a line that couldn't be blurred with guilt or patched with apologies. I called the credit company immediately. Reported the fraud. They froze the new accounts, flagged them as identity theft, and told me to file a police report to protect myself from further damage. I hung up shaking, cold in my own skin. Not because I was afraid of what would happen to him, but because part of me still couldn't believe he'd do it. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on Jessica's couch staring at the ceiling, my hands numb and my mind spinning. He hadn't just stolen from me. He'd taken advantage of the last thing I had left, my identity. And I couldn't keep pretending that keeping the peace was more important than protecting myself. The next morning, I walked into the local precinct with a folder full of printouts and evidence. I filed the report. Gave them everything they needed. I didn't ask them to arrest him. I just wanted it on the record. A line in the sand. But word travels fast in families like mine. Within 24 hours, my mom called me again. This time, it wasn't tears or guilt. It was fury. She accused me of trying to destroy my brother's future. Said I was heartless. Said no matter what he did, I had no right to involve the police. I told her he involved them the moment he committed fraud. She hung up screaming. Then my dad called. For the first time in this whole ordeal, he sounded tired. Not angry. Not accusing. Just tired. He asked if what I said was true. I told him yes. He didn't argue. He didn't defend my brother. He just sighed and said he'd talk to him. That was the moment I realized something strange. He already knew. Maybe not the full details, but enough. Enough to be disappointed, but not enough to act. He never did like conflict. He always let Mom do the yelling, the deciding. He just watched. I hung up without saying goodbye. Because I knew this wasn't over. 2 days later, I got a letter from the landlord. Eviction notice for non-payment. My name wasn't on the lease anymore, but the address still showed up on some of my older records. I called him to clarify that I hadn't lived there in months. He was polite but firm. You might want to clear that up with your family, he said. They listed you as a tenant on the rental assistance application. Said you were still living there. My breath caught. They had used my name again. To apply for state aid. As if I was still there, still part of the household. Still paying rent. I called the agency. Asked them for a copy of the application. They emailed it within an hour. And there it was, my name, listed as a dependent contributor, with forged pay stubs attached. Someone had pulled my old pay history from the job I had before I moved out and used it to qualify for benefits. I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't just burning bridges now, they were mining the ashes for loose change. I called my lawyer friend. She helped me draft a statement disavowing the application. We sent it to the agency, the landlord, and the local housing department. I wasn't going to let them keep lying while my name was attached. If they wanted to live in their own mess, they could do it under their own names. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding. The marketing firm had taken a chance on me after all. Clara offered me a 3-month probationary position with a small stipend. Enough to move into a micro-apartment across town. Tiny, barely furnished, but mine. I used what little money I had left to get a mattress, a lamp, and a second-hand desk. The first night I spent there, with no Wi-Fi and nothing but my phone's flashlight and a half-eaten sandwich, felt like a kind of victory. Not glamorous. Not easy. But real. And slowly, things started to shift. The agency liked my work. Clara sent me more assignments. I got a real paycheck. Then too. I started buying groceries that weren't just instant noodles. I decorated my little space with thrift store art and string lights. I blocked my family's numbers completely. Not because I hated them. But because I needed silence. I needed space to hear myself think again. And then one morning, an envelope slid under my door. No stamp. No return address. Just my name in shaky handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside were 3 things, a photo of me and my mom from years ago, back when things were good. A handwritten note that just said, "I'm sorry. You were right." And a receipt showing she had made the first payment on a debt she didn't name. I sat on the floor staring at it, unsure what to feel. Part of me wanted to rip it up. Part of me wanted to call her. But instead, I tucked it into the back of my journal and kept moving. Because I had come too far to stop now. But the biggest twist? That was still waiting. A secret my brother had kept buried, and when it came to light, it shattered everything I thought I knew about why I'd been pushed out in the first place. The secret came out on a Tuesday afternoon, buried in an email I almost deleted. It was from a lawyer, not mine, but one listed as representing the estate of Jonathan Parks. I didn't recognize the name, so I assumed it was spam. But something about the subject line, disbursement delay, additional beneficiary documentation required, made me pause. I clicked it open. At first, it made no sense. Legal jargon about trusts, settlements, and delayed processing. But then I saw my name listed at the bottom as a potential beneficiary. My full name. My birthdate. My former address, their house. I read it again, slower this time. The email was notifying me of a pending inheritance distribution. From someone named Jonathan Parks. A man I had never met. Or so I thought. I called the number at the bottom, expecting it to be some mistake. The woman who answered, Cheryl, explained everything. Jonathan Parks had been my grandfather. Not my dad's dad, the one who used to send birthday cards with $20 bills when I was little. This was someone else entirely. Someone I had never been told about. Apparently, Jonathan was my biological mother's father. That hit hard. Because the woman I called mom wasn't the one who gave birth to me. I'd always known I was adopted, but it was spoken of so vaguely, something handled quietly when I was still a baby, that I never thought to dig deeper. And I certainly never expected it to come up now, in the middle of a storm that had nothing to do with family trees. Cheryl explained that Jonathan had recently passed and left behind a small estate. Not millions. But enough. And buried deep in his handwritten will was a line that said, to my granddaughter, who was never told the truth, may this help her stand on her own. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, completely numb. Not just because of the inheritance, but because of the words. Never told the truth. That was what this was all about. That was the reason. The cold dinner. The garbage bag. The birthday ambush. They weren't just sick of me. They were scared. They knew something I didn't, and they didn't want me to find out. But now I had. I hung up and started going through old boxes I'd taken from the house, things I hadn't touched since I left. In one of them was a tattered envelope, stuffed with paperwork from the county. Adoption forms. Hospital discharge notes. A birth certificate with a last name I didn't recognize. All of it tucked behind my kindergarten art projects and a photo of me at 6 years old, grinning with cake all over my face. I traced the paper with my fingers and felt the beginning of something shift. My entire life, I'd been trying to belong in a family that didn't want to be honest with me. They had built everything around a lie and then pushed me out the moment that truth got too close. The next day, I confronted my dad. I didn't go to the house, I couldn't, but I called him. This time, I didn't hold back. I asked him about Jonathan. About the adoption. About why they never told me. He didn't deny it. He just sounded tired. Maybe even relieved. He said they had agreed to never tell me because my birth mother was unstable, and they wanted to protect me. He said Jonathan had tried reaching out once when I was a teenager, but my mom shut it down. Said it would only confuse me. He admitted they kept the inheritance letters hidden when they started arriving months ago. Said they didn't want me getting ideas. That's when I realized, this wasn't about family drama or space or money. They kicked me out because they thought I'd find out. That I'd get curious. That I'd go looking. And they were right. I had found out. I wasn't angry about the inheritance. I was angry about everything it represented. They were willing to toss me out like garbage to protect a lie that had already collapsed. They would rather I slept on a bench than learn I belonged to someone else once. That I had roots beyond their carefully guarded version of the truth. And the betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. Because it turned out, when they applied for that rental assistance program, they listed me as a financial contributor knowing full well the inheritance might come through. They were counting on that money. Not for me. But for them. I couldn't believe how deep it went. That night, I made a decision. I signed the legal documents accepting the inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to clear the credit damage my brother caused, to pay for a decent apartment for the next year, and to set up a small savings buffer. I didn't owe them anything anymore. Not even the burden of silence. The truth was mine now. And I planned to live in it. But there was one last thing I had to do. I called Cheryl back and asked if there were any letters left from Jonathan. She paused, then said yes, one. A handwritten envelope addressed simply to my granddaughter, if she ever finds this. She mailed it to me. It arrived 5 days later. Inside was a short note, shaky but heartfelt. He wrote about regretting the lost years. About watching from a distance. About loving someone you've never met. He ended it with a sentence that burned itself into my memory. You are not invisible, even when they pretend you are. That was the last thread. The last lie pulled loose. I knew now that I wasn't just discarded because of inconvenience or frustration. I was a threat to their control, to their narrative, to their version of who I was supposed to be. But now I was free from that. And they were not. Because when you spend your whole life trying to control someone else's story, you forget to write your own. And eventually, the truth finds its way through the cracks. It would have been easy to disappear completely. I had the money now, the truth, and my own apartment where no one barged in or raised their voice when I didn't do the dishes on time. I had no legal ties to them, no debts dragging behind me. For the first time in my life, I owed no one an explanation. And yet, part of me couldn't walk away, not entirely. Not without closing the loop. They had burned bridges, buried truth, and fed off me like a never-ending supply of time, money, and silence. But I had taken it all back. What they had never counted on was that I'd become stronger the moment they cast me out. I waited until the day after rent was due. I knew they hadn't paid it again. I knew the final eviction notice had been served. Lena, still secretly in touch, had texted me a photo of the taped notice on their door. The house was quiet, the lights off. I took a ride share to the neighborhood and stayed in the car across the street, watching from the shadows. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to see it for myself, proof that the lie had finally collapsed under its own weight. Then, around 3 p.m., the moving truck arrived. It wasn't a professional service. It was one of those rental box vans with a peeling logo. My brother stepped out first, followed by my dad, then my mom. She didn't look angry anymore. Just hollow. She walked like someone whose insides had been scooped out. They moved in silence, carrying boxes out one at a time. My brother's smug swagger was gone. He looked older, like he'd finally seen a glimpse of consequences. My father sat on the steps between loads, breathing hard, looking anywhere but at my mother. I thought I'd feel satisfaction watching them pack their lives into a van. But I didn't. I felt distance. Like I was watching strangers go through a tragedy they created for themselves. Later that evening, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. I played it once, then again. It was my mother. Her voice was quiet, almost unrecognizable. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but she hoped I was safe. She admitted they had lied to me. About Jonathan. About the inheritance. About everything. She didn't say she was sorry. Not directly. But it was the closest she'd ever come. She ended the message with a single sentence, "You always deserved better than we gave you." I saved it but never replied. The next day, I walked into my job like any other morning. Clara stopped me in the hallway and handed me an envelope. "Consider it early recognition," she said with a smile. Inside was a letter offering me a full-time role, plus benefits. I took the letter back to my desk and stared at it. Not long ago, I was sleeping on a friend's couch, with $26 in my name and no future. Now, I had health insurance, a place to live, and a life I had built brick by brick out of the wreckage they left me in. That weekend, I used a piece of the inheritance money to sign up for therapy sessions again. This time, not out of crisis, but out of care. I wanted to talk, not about them, but about me. Who I was when no one was yelling. Who I could become when I stopped apologizing for needing space, peace, or truth. My therapist listened, smiled, and said something I'll never forget: survivors are builders. You're not running away. You're rebuilding. And I was. I added houseplants to my windowsill. Started a little bookshelf in the corner. Cooked my own food and danced in the kitchen barefoot. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I wasn't waiting for a thank you or begging for a seat at their table. I had my own table now. Months passed. One day, I got a wedding invitation in the mail, from Lena. She was marrying someone kind, someone steady. I RSVP'd yes, not because I wanted to see my family, but because Lena had stood by me quietly when everyone else had turned their back. When I walked into the venue, wearing a dress I bought myself, paid for with money I earned, I felt no fear. No shame. My parents were there. They saw me. My mom looked away. My dad nodded. My brother avoided me. It didn't matter. I didn't go to their table. I didn't need to. I danced. I laughed. I toasted to Lena's happiness. Later, she pulled me aside and whispered, "You were the strongest one." We all saw it. Even them. They just didn't know how to admit it. I hugged her tight and realized something. I no longer needed validation. I no longer needed justice. I had healed beyond the point where revenge mattered. But perhaps the greatest twist came when I was offered a chance to speak on a panel, a local community forum on financial literacy for young adults. Clara had recommended me. "You've been through the fire," she said. "That's the voice people need." I stood on stage, told my story, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Not with shame, but with power. Afterward, a girl came up to me with tears in her eyes. She said, "That sounded like my life." I didn't know it was okay to walk away. I squeezed her hand and told her the truth. It's not just okay. Sometimes, it's survival. The final act of freedom came quietly. I received a letter from the state, an official notice that the fraud investigation involving my name had been closed. My brother had taken a deal. Community service, probation, mandatory financial counseling. No jail time. But his record was marked. I could have fought for more. But I didn't. Letting go was more powerful than dragging the fight out. Now, when I wake up, I don't brace for yelling through the walls. I don't check my bank account with dread. I don't feel like a ghost in my own life. I drink my coffee slow. I let the light in. I laugh, sometimes for no reason at all. And on my next birthday, I didn't eat takeout alone. I made a cake. I invited new friends. We filled the room with stories and music. No gifts. Just peace. I didn't need revenge. I just needed my life back. And I got it. Every piece of it. On my own terms. So if you've ever been told you were too much, or too selfish, or too cold for drawing a line in the sand, know this: boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. And I finally walked through mine. And I didn't look back.